Hello, my name is William, and welcome to Dragon X Dominion, a realm where dragon legends are forged in fire, honor, and forgotten worlds. I will be your narrator and guide through these epic lands. If you crave powerful stories, legendary dragons, and wars that echo through eternity, then you found your home, ladies and gentlemen. So like, subscribe, and claim your place among these legends. The egg had been sitting in the corner of the hatching hall for 3 days, and nobody had touched it. All the other eggs from the clutch had already cracked open. Big, loud hatchlings had come tumbling out, red-scaled, gold-scaled, some already breathing smoke before they even opened their eyes. The Drakari elders had moved through the hall like judges at a contest, pressing their clawed hands to each new hatchling, nodding with satisfaction. Strong bones, wide wing buds, good color. The bloodline was healthy, but the small egg in the corner stayed shut. It was not much to look at. The shell was dull gray instead of the usual deep crimson. It was smaller than any of the others by half, and it was cold, a thing that should never be, for a dragon egg was always warm, always humming faintly with inner heat. This one felt like a stone pulled from a river. Elder Vorath crouched in front of it on the third morning. He was an old Drakari, heavy with age, his scales the color of dried blood. He had overseen 40 hatching seasons. He pressed one finger to the egg's surface and pulled it back quickly, his face tight. "Still cold," he said. Soraya stood near the far wall. She was the clutch mother, the one who had laid this egg along with the others. She was tall and silver-scaled, and she kept her eyes on the floor, which was not a thing she normally did. "It is still alive," she said quietly. "I can hear it, barely." Vorath stood up. He did not look at her. A cold egg produces a cold hatchling. You know what that means. She did know. Every Drakari knew. A hatchling without heat was considered broken at the root. No fire, no flight. A life of weakness in a civilization that saw weakness as an insult. The clan records would simply not include it. The hatchling would be removed, taken to the edge of colony space and released in a small pod, which was the polite word for what was really just a very clean kind of abandonment. "It may still develop," Soraya said. Vorath looked at her then, and the look was enough. The egg cracked on the fourth morning. It did not crack the way the others had, with a sudden split and a burst of warmth and a hatchling tumbling out, already snapping at the air. This one cracked slowly, almost carefully, one thin line running from top to bottom over the course of an hour. When the shell finally fell away, what was inside sat very still and blinked. It was small, much too small. Its scales were the flat gray of old ash. Its wing buds were barely visible, just two small ridges along the back, nowhere near the size they should be. It had no smoke. No heat rose from its skin. It looked up at the empty hall with large golden eyes and made no sound at all. Vorath had already made his decision 2 days before the egg opened. Soraya wrapped the hatchling herself. She used fireproof cloth from her own kit. She did not speak while she did it, and her hands did not shake. And later she would tell herself that this meant she had done the right thing. She carried the bundle to the small launch pod at the edge of the compound. She set it inside. She sealed the door. She stood outside for a moment longer than she should have. Then she walked back inside and did not look at the sky. The pod drifted. It had a basic distress beacon. Standard equipment, never expected to matter this far out on the rim where nothing passed except the occasional cargo run. The hatchling inside did not cry. It lay in the cloth and looked at the small viewport above and watched the stars move slowly past. It was cold. It had always been cold. But it was alive, and it kept its eyes open, and somewhere in those golden irises was something that had not yet decided to give up. The distress beacon blinked for 11 hours before anything picked it up. What responded was not a Drakari vessel. It was not a military ship or a compact patrol. It was a human cargo freighter called the Steady Hand, a mid-sized hauler with a patched hull, 3 working engines out of 4, and a cargo bay full of machine parts bound for a rim colony. It was the kind of ship that appeared in no one's threat assessment, that attracted no attention at ports, that was invisible to the powerful the same way all ordinary things are invisible. It picked up the beacon because Garrett Calloway was the kind of man who checked every signal, even the ones that were probably nothing. He pulled the pod into the docking bay manually. He was still wiping his hands on a rag when the inner door opened and his two children came running past him the way they always did when anything new came aboard. Nora got there first. She was 14 and she had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she was already reaching for the pod latch before he could say, "Wait." The pod opened. The hatchling blinked up at them. Cody, 9 years old and afraid of almost nothing, dropped to his knees on the deck. His mouth fell open. He looked at the small gray creature in the fireproof cloth, and then he looked up at his father with an expression that contained an entire argument without a single word. Garrett Calloway looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked back at him with those large golden eyes, calm and patient and very, very cold. "Dad," Cody whispered, "it's a baby dragon." Garrett said nothing for a long moment. Then he crouched down, checked the hatchling's breathing, found it steady, and said, "Go get the emergency blankets, the thick ones." That was how it started. The first problem was that the hatchling would not eat. Garrett had set it up in a cargo crate lined with the thick emergency blankets, with a heat lamp clamped to the side because the creature's skin was still cold to the touch, even after hours of warming. It lay in the blankets and watched every movement in the room with those gold eyes, but turned its head away from everything they put in front of it. Nora consulted her xenobiology files. She had been downloading them for 2 years onto her personal reader, not because school required it, but because she found the universe more interesting than most humans gave it credit for. She scrolled through the Drakari entry quickly, skimming for diet. "Hatchlings in the first week eat partially digested meat provided by the clutch mother," she read aloud. "We don't have that," Garrett said. "Obviously." She kept reading. Failing that, warm protein paste, fine ground, something with high fat and iron content. Garrett went to the kitchen unit and combined emergency ration paste with rendered fat from the stores and a mineral supplement they used for the ship's water supply because it contained iron. He warmed it to body temperature. He brought it back in a cup. Cody had already been sitting cross-legged in front of the crate for 40 minutes. He took the cup from his father without being asked, dipped a spoon in, and held it out flat in front of the hatchling's face the way he had once seen a wildlife documentary show for frightened animals. He did not push it forward. He just held it there. The hatchling's nostrils moved. It pulled its head back. Then, very slowly, it came forward again. It sniffed the spoon for a long time. Then it ate. Cody looked back at his father with the most triumphant expression a 9-year-old face is capable of producing. Garrett did not make a big deal of it. He just nodded once and went back to the cockpit where he had a call to make. The Alien Affairs office at Dunn's station answered on the 4th ring. A bored voice told him that an unregistered Drakari hatchling found in open space was a restricted biological matter and needed to be reported to the Dominion's nearest outpost within 48 hours. When he asked what would happen to the hatchling after that, the voice paused for a moment and said, "It would be handled according to Drakari internal policy." Garrett knew what that meant. He thanked the voice and ended the call. He sat in the pilot's chair for a while, looking at the dark outside the viewport. Then he went and got his copy of the Galactic Compact Charter, the actual document, the whole thing, which he had picked up cheap at a used goods market years ago for reasons he could not fully explain even to himself. And he started reading. He found what he needed in Article 7. Nora had found the same passage 20 minutes earlier. She was waiting in the doorway of the cockpit when he looked up. "Abandoned life form," she said. "No registered ownership. Legally defaults to the rescuer. They have to have formally abandoned it," he said. "Their own records will show no registered hatchling from that clutch. I checked the Dominion's public registry. The cold pod had no ID, no name, no number. As far as their paperwork is concerned, this animal does not exist." He looked at her for a moment. "You already ran all this. I ran it when you were on the phone. She crossed her arms. I also ran our supply numbers. We have enough protein base to feed it for 4 months if we ration. After that, we'd need to pick up extra stores. He was quiet. Dad, she said, and her voice shifted into something more honest and less practical. It ate out of Cody's hand. It's been alone in a cold box in space. Whatever they threw it out for, it wasn't because it did anything wrong. Garrett looked out the viewport again, then back at her. Go tell your brother to stop naming it. She raised an eyebrow. He already named it. What did he name it? Gray. Garrett looked at the ceiling for a moment. Fine. Tell your brother Gray needs a second helping. That was how the decision was made. Not with a speech, not with a plan, just with two people who had already arrived at the same answer from different directions, and a third who had never needed to think about it at all. Over the next 3 months, the steady hand continued its roots. Garrett filed no special paperwork. He told no one at port. Gray stayed in the cargo bay during docking and was very good at being quiet, which turned out to be a natural talent Gray grew. Slowly but visibly. The frame filled out. The claws grew longer. The golden eyes grew sharper. Still no wings to speak of. Just those 2 flat ridges along the back. Still no fire. Not a spark of it. But Gray began to move through the ship with more confidence, following Cody like a second shadow through every corridor and compartment. The hatchling learned words faster than any of them expected. Human standard first. Single words, then short strings. Cody taught them through pure repetition, the same way a child picks up a language, by saying everything out loud all day long and trusting the other person to catch up. What surprised Garrett was not that Gray learned. It was that Gray watched. Every repair he made, Gray watched. Every route calculation, every engine check, every conversation at port, Gray watched and said nothing, and stored it all away behind those quiet gold eyes. One evening, Garrett was wrestling with a faulty pressure valve, and Gray sat beside him, and after a moment, placed one claw very precisely on the coupling he had been about to reach for, the one he needed, before he had asked for it. Garrett stopped, looked at Gray, looked at the coupling. Thanks, he said. Gray said nothing, but the scales along the neck shifted slightly. A faint warmth, the smallest change of color. And Garrett had been around living things long enough to know what that looked like. That was the first time the ship had felt like enough. The scout saw Gray through the cargo bay viewport while the steady hand was docked at Dunn Station for a routine resupply run. It was bad luck. Or maybe just the kind of thing that was always going to happen eventually. The scout was a Drakari trade vessel inspector named Drath, young, mid-rank, doing a standard sweep of vessels at the dock. He was not looking for anything unusual. He glanced through the viewport as he passed and stopped walking. Gray was sitting in the bay with Cody. The two of them bent over a star chart together, Gray's large head close to the boy's shoulder. Even from outside, even with the viewport glass between them, the scales were unmistakable. Drakari, small, wingless, wrong color. Drath stood very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then he walked quickly back to his vessel. The formal notice arrived at the Steady Hands communication port 3 hours later. It was from Elder Vorath's clan office, routed through the Dominion's legal arm, and it demanded the immediate surrender of an unregistered Drakari biological entity currently aboard the registered human vessel, Steady Hand. The notice referred to Gray as restricted property. It referenced 4 separate pieces of Dominion internal law. It was 12 pages long. Garrett read all 12 pages at the kitchen table that night after the kids were in their bunks. He read it twice. Then he folded it, put it on the table, and looked at it for a while. Gray was not in a bunk. Gray did not sleep in bunks. Gray slept on the floor of the corridor outside the children's rooms, curled across the full width of the passage, which meant anyone who wanted to get from one end of the ship to the other at night had to either step over the dragon or go the long way around. Garrett had started going the long way around weeks ago, not because he minded, but because he didn't want to wake Gray up. He got up from the table and walked to the corridor and stood there in the low night lighting, looking at Gray. Larger now, filling more space, the dark, iridescent scales faintly catching the light, the gold eyes closed. One of Cody's old shirts was balled up under Gray's chin, being used as a pillow. Garrett went back to the table and called Fen Adler. Fen Adler was not a famous lawyer. He was not even a particularly confident one. He operated out of a rented office at Dunn's station that was roughly the size of a storage closet and had a sign on the door that said Legal Scrafus in letters that had been printed crookedly. He charged 30 credits a day because that was as low as he could go and still cover his rent. He had never argued a galactic compact alien affairs case in his life. But he answered his comm at midnight, which already put him ahead of 3 other lawyers Garrett had tried, and when Garrett explained the situation, Fen did not say good luck with that or contact the Dominion directly. He said, "Read me the article number on the surrender notice." Garrett read it. Fen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pull up Article 7 of the Compact Charter, subsection 4. Garrett already had it open. "Now look at the Dominion's public registry for the clutch date on the notice." Garrett pulled it up. The clutch was there. 4 registered hatchlings. No fifth. No anomaly noted. No cold egg. Nothing. They declared it non-existent in their own records, Fen said, and his voice had shifted. Less uncertain now, more focused. They cannot file a surrender claim on a thing they have officially declared does not exist. That is a logical contradiction in the law they themselves are using. He paused. This is actually a very clean case. Can you win it? I can win it with their own paperwork, Fen said. Yes. The hearing at Meridian Hub was scheduled for 6 weeks later. It was technically a minor administrative proceeding, but the Dominion sent a delegation anyway. 4 Drakari in full formal armor, led by their legal advocate Drax Sorath, who was 2 meters tall and had an impressive history of making smaller beings go very quiet when he entered a room. He entered the room. Garrett and Fen did not go quiet. Fen was too busy reviewing his notes. Garrett was watching the ceiling with the expression of a man calculating engine tolerances. The hearing took 90 minutes. Fen made 3 arguments, slowly and clearly, in basic standard, so everyone in the room could follow. First, the Compact's own law stated that a life form found abandoned in open space with no registered ownership transferred to the custody of the rescuer. Second, the Dominion's own public registry contained no record of the hatchling. It had been officially omitted, which, under Drakari internal law, was equivalent to formal abandonment. Third, a claim of ownership over a thing officially declared non-existent was legally incoherent, and the Dominion could not have it both ways. Drax Sorath argued for the Dominion with great force and impressive volume. He cited tradition, bloodline law, and species sovereignty. He was articulate and powerful, and he had clearly done this many times before. The tribunal took 11 minutes to rule. Gray was classified as a ward of a registered human household, the Calloway family of the Steady Hand. Annual review required. No further action by the Dominion permitted under current compact statutes. Drax Sorath leaned close to Garrett on the way out and said in a low voice, "The hatchling will never be what it was supposed to be. It will die small and useless, and you will have wasted your feeling on it." Garrett looked up at him calmly and said, "Watch." In the hallway outside, Gray had heard everything through the door. The hatchling was sitting very still against the wall when the family came out. Cody immediately sat down next to Gray on the floor. Nora crouched down on the other side. Gray looked at Garrett for a long moment. Then, slowly and carefully, in human standard that was still slightly rough around the edges, but clear enough, "I do not want to be small forever." Nora put her hand on Gray's head. "Then don't be," she said. Fen Adler, standing a little behind them and pretending to look at his notes, allowed himself a very small smile. 2 years passed the way time passes on a working freighter. Not in clean chapters, but in small things adding up quietly. Gray learned the engine room the way someone learns a language they were always meant to speak. Garrett started with pressure values, basic tolerances, the difference between a warning reading and a critical one. Gray absorbed it all and then moved past it, finding patterns in the data that Garrett had always felt but never been able to name. One morning, Gray rerouted the fuel distribution across all 3 working engines without being asked, and the Steady Hands fuel consumption dropped by 11%. Garrett stood in the engine room for a long time looking at the new configuration. He could not find a single thing wrong with it. He never changed it back. Nora started Gray on reading with children's books, which Gray found mildly insulting, so she moved to standard texts within a week, then to history, then to compact law, because Gray had developed an opinion about compact law after the hearing and wanted to understand exactly how much of it they could use. Gray read slowly at first, then faster, then in a way that stopped being reading and started being something closer to memorizing. Nora would find Gray in the cargo bay late at night with 3 books open at once, the gold eyes moving between them in the dim light. Why do humans keep fighting after they lose? Gray asked one evening, partway through A History of the First Rim Conflict. Nora thought about it honestly. I think most of them can't tell the difference between losing and being done, she said. It's a flaw. It does not read like a flaw, Gray said. She had no answer for that. Cody simply lived alongside Gray the way children live alongside animals they love. Without distance, without pretense, without any of the careful behavior adults tend to use around large things they cannot fully predict. He dragged Gray into games the dragon did not understand. He explained the rules badly and then changed them halfway through. He told Gray jokes that required 3 layers of human cultural context to be funny, and then laughed himself breathless when Gray stared at him in total confusion. The first joke Gray made came on a Tuesday. It was a pun, a bad one, involving the word for a pressure valve coupling and a phrase Cody used when something broke, and it required understanding both the technical term and the slang in the same moment. Cody did not get it for 3 full seconds. Then he fell off his chair. Gray made a sound that was not quite human laughter, but was its own thing, low and warm and slightly surprised, like a creature discovering it had a voice it had never used before. Garrett heard it from the cockpit and did not move for a moment. Then he got up very quietly and walked to the back of the ship to check on something that did not actually need checking. They stopped at the colony of New Brescia for a 2-week maintenance layover. It was a working-class settlement, mostly human, practical and blunt in the way rim colonies tend to be. People stared at Gray openly, which Gray was used to. Most stares were just curiosity. But at the loading dock on the 3rd day, a group of alien laborers from a Tareshi crew made their feelings more explicit. They said it in Tareshi first, a language Gray had been studying for 6 weeks and now understood well enough. Then one of them said it again in Standard, perhaps wanting to make sure the dragon understood. Broken, Drakari garbage, something that should not have survived. Gray went very still. The scales along the neck and shoulders shifted to a flat, dark tone that the Callaways had learned to read as something between grief and cold anger. Cody stepped in front of Gray. He was 11 years old. He came up to the lead laborer's chest. He looked directly up at the man's face and said, in a voice that was entirely too steady for his age, that they could take their opinions and keep walking, and that if they had a problem with his family, they had a problem with him, and that they should think carefully about whether that was the kind of problem they wanted to have today. The laborers looked at the small human boy, then at the large gray dragon behind him, then at each other. They kept walking. Gray stood still for a moment after they left. Then one large foreleg moved and rested very gently on Cody's shoulder. Cody reached up and put his hand on it without looking back. That night, Gray curled around Cody while the boy slept and lay awake watching the door of the quarters with a steadiness that was not anxiety, but something else. Something chosen. A post taken voluntarily, not assigned. Gray had been a thing discarded, had drifted alone in a cold pod and not yet understood what the coldness meant. But in this moment, in this small room, on this battered ship, Gray understood something that could not have been explained to the hatchling in that pod. Worth is not given at hatching. It is built day by day in the people you place yourself between and the world. The physical changes were slow but real. Gray's frame had widened considerably. The wing buds along the back had not grown into proper wings. They remained as flat ridges, but the musculature around them had deepened as though something beneath was pressing outward and not yet finding a way through. The scales had shifted far from their original ash gray. They were dark now, almost black, but with a quality of light in them, a faint iridescence that moved when the angle changed, like oil on deep water. No Drakari in any record Nora could find had that coloring. No fire still. Not a spark. Then, at Port Dunway, a disgraced Drakari scholar named Aura arrived at their docking ring and asked to speak with Gray privately. She was young, low-ranked, and clearly nervous. Her scales kept shifting in the way Drakari did when they were uncertain. She had a reader full of research she had been quietly building for years, work that had cost her her standing in the academic order and earned her nothing but hostility from the Dominion. She sat across from Gray in the cargo bay and said, without wasting time, "What they told you about your defects, they are not defects. The Dominion has been removing these traits from the bloodline for 300 years, not because they are weaknesses." Gray was very still. "Because," Aura said quietly, "they make Drakari who cannot be controlled." She opened her reader and showed Gray the old texts, the ones the Dominion had buried but not fully destroyed. Gray read in silence for a long time. When Gray looked up, the iridescent scales were moving in a way Aura had never seen outside of her oldest documents. She felt the hair on her arms stand up. "What am I?" Gray asked. Aura said, "The old kind. The kind they were afraid of." They were 3 days out from Port Dunway when the fleet appeared on the long-range scanner, 5 Drakari warships, holding position across the steady hands route like a wall. Not moving to intercept yet, just there, visible, letting the freighter's crew understand what was happening before it happened. It was the kind of maneuver designed to cause a specific kind of fear. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how outmatched you are. Garrett looked at the scanner for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Aura, who had been standing at the back of the cockpit since the contacts appeared and whose scales had gone the flat, dark tone of controlled fear. "Vorath," she said. "He manufactured a pretext? He would not need much of one. In Drakari-controlled space, his word carries more weight than compact law." She paused. "He has been watching for an opportunity since the tribunal. I should have warned you sooner." "Yes," Garrett said. "You should have." Then, "Go sit with Nora." He opened a channel and answered the fleet's hailing signal. The boarding was controlled and efficient. 12 Drakari soldiers in full armor, moving through the steady hand with the practiced ease of people who had done this many times before. Garrett, Nora, and Cody were directed to the cargo bay and placed against the far wall with 2 soldiers watching them. Aura was restrained separately. Her research reader was taken. They brought a cage for Gray. It was large, heavy, clearly prepared in advance. Magnetic seal construction, the kind rated for large, dangerous life forms. They had done their research on the physical dimensions. They had not, apparently, done enough research on anything else. Gray walked into the cargo bay ahead of the soldiers without being dragged, which confused them. Gray looked at the cage, then at Garrett. Garrett gave one small nod. His expression was steady. Gray read it correctly. Not surrender, not fear. Stay calm. Trust the process a little longer. Gray stepped into the cage. Elder Vorath came aboard an hour later. He was older than the last time Gray had seen him, heavier around the neck, slower in the walk, but none of that had touched the hard certainty in his face. He came into the cargo bay and stood in front of the cage and looked at what was inside it for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition exactly. Something more like the faint discomfort a person feels when a thing they have dismissed turns out to be larger than they remembered. He recovered quickly. Pride has good reflexes. "I was told the humans had made something of you," he said. "I wanted to see it." Gray looked at him without any visible emotion. "You are afraid of a caged aberration?" "Not of me," Gray said. "Of what it means that I exist." You removed the old bloodline traits for 300 years. That was a choice. If I am alive and those traits are still in the blood, then the choice was wrong. And you do not know how to be wrong. Vorath's expression went cold and smooth, the way old things go when touched in a place they have protected for a very long time. He turned to the soldier nearest the cage. Open it. Process the animal. The soldier moved to the cage door. The magnetic seal disengaged. The door swung open. Gray walked out. What happened next happened without sound. No roar. No warning posture. No performance of any kind. One moment Gray was stepping through the cage door, and the next moment fire existed in the cargo bay where there had been no fire before. It was not orange. It was not red. It was white at the edges and an intense, impossible blue at the center, the kind of blue found at the heart of a welding flame or a star's corona. It moved with an intelligence that ordinary fire does not have, flowing exactly as far as Gray directed it, touching exactly what Gray intended it to touch. The cage became slag in 4 seconds. The soldiers nearest it fell back. 2 of them dropped their weapons. One of them said something in Drakari that Gray understood perfectly. An old word, from the old texts, a word Aura had shown them I'd breathe. The word traveled through the soldiers like a current. Even Vorath's composure cracked. Not into fear exactly, but into something older and less controlled. Something carved into Drakari instinct long before 3 centuries of selective breeding had tried to file it smooth. Gray did not move toward any of them. Gray walked to Vorath and stopped 2 meters away, and the blue fire sat in Gray's chest like a lamp behind a shutter. Not released. Present. I was taught by humans, Gray said. They are stubborn in ways that are not always wise. But they taught me something else. They showed me mercy before I ever knew what it was. Before I had earned it. Before I could return it. Before I even understood it was being given. Gray stepped back. I am not going to kill you. I am going to let you leave. And you are going to spend the rest of your life knowing that the thing you threw away in a cold pod made that choice. Vorath did not speak. His soldiers were standing back. Some had lowered their weapons to their sides. 2 near the far wall had gone to one knee, not surrendering. Something older than surrender, a reflex from stories they had been told as hatchlings about the old kind, the kind from before. Garrett uncrossed his arms and walked across the cargo bay to stand beside Gray. Nobody stopped him. Aura was released. Her reader was not returned, but she had already transmitted the complete research file from a secondary device built into her collar, broadcast to 43 xenobiology archives across the compact in the 30 seconds between the cage opening and the fire appearing. By the time anyone thought to jam the signal, the data was already in 100 servers. The warships did not fire on the steady hand. They held position as Garrett guided the freighter out of the blockade. Slow and deliberate, and then they watched it go. Later, in the cockpit, Garrett sat in his chair with the adrenaline finally working through his body, his hands on the console and not quite steady. Gray settled beside him, large and warm now, genuinely warm, radiating a heat that felt less like a threat and more like an afternoon in sunlight. "Are you okay?" Garrett said. "Yes," Gray said. "Are you?" Garrett laughed. It came out long and uneven and relieved, the kind of laugh that happens when the thing you feared most has passed, and your body has not yet agreed that it's over. Gray laughed too, that low, warm sound that was its own thing and nobody else's. They sat together in the light of the open stars and for a little while said nothing more, because nothing more needed to be said. Aura's research spread the way fire spreads when the ground is dry, faster than anyone could control in directions nobody predicted. Within a week of the broadcast, the file had been cited in 11 academic papers by compact scholars who had spent years quietly skeptical of Dominion genetics policy. Within a month, young Drakari researchers were pulling the old texts out of archives the Dominion had never quite managed to fully bury, and asking questions in public that would have cost them their standing 6 months ago. The Dominion's official position was that Gray was an isolated anomaly. The Dominion's unofficial position was panic, expressed through the kind of controlled silence that powerful institutions adopt when they do not know what else to do. The Galactic Compact Council sent a formal invitation to Gray, not to the Calloway family. To Gray, personally, the first non-citizen life form in the Council's recorded history to receive one. The invitation was for an address to the full assembly at Meridian Hub. Garrett read it aloud at the kitchen table. Cody immediately said yes on Gray's behalf. Gray, who was too large now to fit entirely in the kitchen and had one end of the body in the corridor, waited until Cody had finished and then said, with the patience of someone very used to this, "I believe I should answer for myself." "Obviously yes, though," Cody said. "Obviously yes," Gray agreed. The hall at Meridian Hub held 400 delegates from 87 registered species. When Gray walked to the speaking platform, the room was the kind of quiet that only happens when a very large number of people all decide at the same moment not to move. Gray looked out at the assembly for a few seconds and then said, "I was thrown away. A human family picked me up. They did not do this because I was valuable or because I had proved anything. They did it because I was there and I needed it. I have since learned that this is a pattern with them. They are not the largest species in this compact. They are not the oldest. Their technology is adequate, and their ships are held together with more optimism than is probably wise. But I have watched one of them read the entire Galactic Compact Charter at a kitchen table at midnight because he needed to know if it could protect something small and cold. I have watched one of them stand in front of a Drakari soldier at 9 years old because something unkind was said near someone she loved. I have watched one of them teach a creature that was not human and not expected to survive how to read, how to think, and how to laugh." Gray paused. "I would suggest the rest of you stop underestimating them." There was a silence that lasted about 3 seconds. Then the hall erupted. Nora, sitting in the observer's gallery, looked straight ahead and blinked several times. Garrett watched the crowd. Cody cheered loudly enough that 2 delegates from species with sensitive hearing turned around to look at him. The harder meeting came 2 days later. Soraya sent a private message through a neutral intermediary. No clan seal, no Dominion routing, just a personal comm address and a request. Gray sat with it for a long time before answering yes. They met in a small room off one of Meridian Hub's lower corridors. Soraya was older than Gray had any real memory of. All Gray had was a cold pod and fireproof cloth and the scent of someone who had stayed outside for a moment longer than they should have. She was tall and silver-scaled, and her composure was careful in the way of someone who has practiced being composed for years. She said she was sorry. She said it simply, without explanation or excuse, which was the right way to say it. Gray believed her, and said so, and also said that believing her did not make the cold go away entirely, and that she should know that because honesty was something the Calloways had modeled at every turn, and Gray was not going to stop now. Soraya nodded. Her scales shifted once, a flicker of something old and unguarded, and then she was composed again. They did not embrace. They did not make promises. They parted in the hallway without resolution, but without hatred either, which was more than Gray had expected, and probably more than was deserved. Gray told Garrett about it that evening. Garrett listened from start to finish without interrupting, which was one of his most underrated qualities. When Gray finished, Garrett said, "How do you feel?" Gray thought about it honestly. Like something that was crooked has been straightened slightly. Not fixed. Slightly straightened. That's usually how it goes, Garrett said. Aura was reinstated within the academic community under heavy compact pressure, and given the first independent research position in Drakari genetics the Dominion had ever permitted under outside oversight. She named her program after an old Drakari word that translated roughly as returned. She sent Gray a message that was 3 lines long and ended with, "I hope the fire is warm." Gray replied, "It is. Thank you for naming it." On the last evening at Meridian Hub, Cody asked the question that had been building in him for weeks. He asked it sitting on the cargo bay floor the way he had sat since he was 9 years old, leaning against Gray's side while the dragon's warmth settled around him like a room. "Are you going to stay?" he said. "I mean, now that everything's different. You could go. You could do anything." Gray was quiet for a moment. "Where would I go?" Gray said. "You are my family." Cody was quiet too. Then he nodded once, in the decisive way of someone filing a matter as permanently settled. The next morning, the steady hand lifted off from Meridian Hub. Cargo in the hold, 3 engines working, 1 still doing its best. Garrett at the controls, Nora in the co-pilot seat with a book open across her knees. Cody in the back, asleep, one hand resting on Gray's foreleg. Gray watching the stars through the viewport as the station fell away behind them. Gray thought about a cold pod and 2 small faces pressed to a viewport. About a man reading fine print at midnight. About laughter heard for the first time and the long, slow process of learning not to flinch from it. Gray thought, I was not given a place in this world. I was given something better. I was given people who built one with me. The steady hand jumped to FTL. The stars became light. Somewhere in the back of the ship, Cody slept without dreaming of anything difficult. Gray closed gold eyes and was, at last, entirely at peace.